My name is Christopher Barish, and today I will be showing you how to sew using a thread and a needle. So, the reason I'm making this video is because sewing is a very essential tool to know how to do. A lot of people don't know how to do it, and that is the reason I'm making this video, because I want to inform people on how to sew using a thread and a needle. And the sewing technique that I'll be using today is a cross stitch, and this stitch is very good for sewing up holes and making it so that the thread does not show after you sew up the hole. So something I learned from all this research is that sewing is a very ancient practice. People who lived in the prehistoric times, and more specifically the ice ages, used bone and sometimes iron if they could find it, and they would use that along with sinew, which is tendon from an animal, and they would take that and they would sew together their fur hides to make clothing. So knowing about these different things helped me to learn how to sew, because it presented me with more information about the history of sewing, and so that allowed me to apply that to my technique, and also to just give me a little more information about how important sewing is. Okay, so first off, I want to show you the main tools that I will be using for this demonstration. So first off, I have scissors. This is going to be used to cut the thread. I have a needle, and the needle will be used to sew by putting the thread through the cloth. I have my thread. This is cotton thread. And I have my demonstration fabric. Now, as you can see, I put a little hole through the fabric to demonstrate or simulate a tear in a piece of clothing. Okay, so now I will show you how to sew. So first, I'm going to take my thread. I'm going to cut a sizable length. Having too much is always better, because if you have too much, you can always cut off excess, but if you have too little, you're gonna have to start all over again. So first, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm going to cut the thread at a slight angle. And the reason I cut it at a slight angle is because this way it helps the thread go through the needle. Okay, so now I'm going to locate the eye of the needle. It's probably kind of hard to see in the camera, but it's at the top. And now what I'm going to do with the thread, the end of the thread, is I'm going to wet it using my mouth. And the reason I wet it is because this way it closes all the fibers together, and that way it is easier to insert into the eye of the needle. Okay, so next I'm going to insert it through the eye of the needle, just like that. I'm going to pull a little bit through, and then I'm going to tie a series of overhand knots to secure the thread to the needle. So I'm just going to do that a couple times. I like to do 3, just to make sure it's really on there. Okay, so once I have those 3 overhand knots tied, next what I'm going to do is I am going to snip the loose tag end of the thread. In this way, it just eliminates that part because you don't need it anymore, and it keeps it cleaner. Okay, so now you have your thread attached to the needle. Okay, so next comes the stitching part. This is the most important part, obviously, but it is also the point where you have to pay attention the most in order to understand it. Okay, so we have our tear. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go just past the end of it, and we're going to go right down the middle, basically, just like this. And you're going to stick the needle through. And as you can see, I started even before the tear even started, and this is so it gives the stitching some rigidity in terms of wear and tear, because obviously if this is on a piece of clothing, it is going to have some wear and tear. And so what you're going to do is you're going to want to pull it all the way until just a little bit of the thread is left on the other side, about 4 inches or so. Next, what you are going to do is you're going to tie another series of overhand knots to secure this part of the thread to the fabric. So I'm just going to do 3 again, and that's the beginning of it. Okay, so one thing that you also want to keep in the back of your head is the side that I did this on. So if this was a piece of clothing, this would be the inside of the clothing, okay? This would be the part that would be showing outside, and this would be the inside. The reason we do this is because the stitching shows up on the inside rather than the outside, and also the knots and loose pieces of little thread often, would make the appearance of the clothing look more raggedy and thus, to most people, ugly. So we started on the inside of the piece of clothing, not on the outside. Okay, so next comes the actual stitching part. What you're gonna do is you're going to simply pinch the clothing where the tear is together. You're going to make sure it is at the same level throughout the whole entire piece of thread, almost like, piece of where the tear is, okay? So it's going to be like that. As you can see, it is all level, and this makes it easier to do the cross stitch method of sewing, okay? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go about 1 millimeter to the left, which would be this way in my view, and I'm going to put it at the same depth that I put it for the initial knot. Okay, so you're basically just following that same depth but a millimeter over, okay? And I'm going to, remember, I'm still grasping the clothing, and make sure it is level throughout the tear, if possible. I know most tears are very rigidy or raggedy, so it might be difficult, but what we're going to do is we're going to, take the same depth, and we're going to push it through to the other side, okay? Once we do that, we're going to pull it all the way through, okay? Then, once it's on this side of the clothing, we're going to bring it back around, and then we're going to do the same thing another millimeter down, okay? So I'm going to do that again, and you're just going to keep on repeating this process a millimeter at a time, okay? Remember, same depth. You want to stick it through, clothing level, and pull. Right? Stick it through, make it level, and pull. And so, just gonna keep on doing this. Now, obviously, with sewing, you might be able to still tell a little bit, depending on the cloth that you're going to be using. So, for instance, I'm using a t-shirt, so, it'll show a decent amount, but it won't, obviously look like a tear happened. It'll simply look as if, obviously, I guess someone sewed it. Okay, so we're gonna finish this up, and we're gonna bring it just past the tear, okay? So you can see I'm bringing it a little bit past the tear, put it one more, two more. Okay, so this is gonna be the last one I'm gonna do. But now we're gonna have this big loop that we created through the sewing, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the needle and I'm gonna put it through the loop, okay? And this is gonna be how you finish the sewing, okay? So I'm gonna put it through the same spot, pull, stick it through the hole, and then pull the needle. Ready? Stick it at the same spot, pull, remember you create your little loop, stick it through the loop, the needle through the loop, and pull, okay? And so that's basically it. Next, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut the little tag end off, show you the finished product. As you can see, you can still see the stitching a little bit, but for the most part, it looks almost as if nothing ever happened. And so yeah, that's how you do the cross stitch method of sewing. Okay. Thank you for watching my video on how to sew using the cross stitch method. Just a little conclusion about what I learned through this project about myself is that I may not be the best stitcher, obviously out there. This was a little bit more sloppy than what I would have liked, but for the sake of this video, I had to keep it relatively short. so I did speed through the process a little bit more than I would have usually. But you know, I did find it kind of exciting learning more about stitching, especially since my grandmother spent a lot of her time growing up stitching. She sewed her own clothes, knitted her own clothes. She was very big on, you know, using threads, needles, and whatnot to make clothing. So it was kind of cool learning about that, and kind of learning about my heritage a little more in terms of sewing, and a little bit about the challenging aspects of this project, or of this video. Obviously the time restraint. I didn't want to make this video too long because I don't want to bore viewers and, you know, those viewing this video. So yeah. So about my finished product, I was pretty pleased with my finished product, but if I was given a little bit more time, maybe better materials and an actual tear, I feel like you know, that's what I would do if I was to do this video differently. So once again, thank you for watching my video, and I hope I taught you a thing or two about sewing, and hopefully in the future, if you get a tear or a rip in your clothing, you know exactly what to do to fix it. See you next time.